This is Dr. Aidoo with the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology, School of Medical Sciences, University of Cape Coast. I'm glad to come your way once again with yet another episode. We are going to look at the GIT, starting from the esophagus to the inner canal. I'm going to cover this in parts. So in the first part, I'll cover from esophagus to the stomach, and then in another part, I'll continue with the small intestine, and then we will conclude with the large intestine. So for GIT briefs, I just want to give you the outline or general architecture of the GIT. So it's basically made up of three major parts. You have the mucosa, submucosa, and then adventitia or serosa. The mucosa is made up of the epithelium, lamina propria, which is loose connective tissue, and then the muscularis mucosa, which is a smooth muscle. Then beneath that, you have the submucosa, which is usually made up of a dense, irregular connective tissue, followed by the adventitia or serosa, depending on whether the tube is directly attached to the posterior abdominal wall. You are going to have an adventitia, or if it is suspended by a mesentery, then you have a serosa. Within this GIT makeup, you are going to find GALT, the gout. This is actually a diffuse lymphatic tissue, the gut associated lymphatic tissue. Then you also have the APUD, which is the amine precursor uptake decarboxylation. Within this same GIT setup, you find Meissner's and Albert plexus. The Meissner's ones are located within the muscularis mucosa, and then the Albert plexus is found within the muscularis externa, which is sometimes termed muscularis propria. It's made up of the inner circular, outer longitudinal, or the inner oblique, inner circular, outer longitudinal when you are looking at the stomach. So as an overview of what we've done in the past, in order to link your memory to what I'm about to begin, I just want you to remember that we have the oral cavity with which we can look at the lip, the oral mucosa, and then the vermilion border. So that is the stratification there, as you can see. And then you also see stratification there. Then you realize that you have salivary glands in the submucosa of the oral portion of the lip, but you don't have that in the vermilion border. The vermilion border is where the ladies usually apply their lipstick that contains a lot of dilated venous and veins. So we should know that. Then the salivary glands have this architecture. You have this circular or spherical portion that will contain the acinar cells, within which you have the myoepithelial cells surrounding the acinar cells. Then that is the basal lamina or basement membrane of the lining epithelia. You can see that the myoepithelial cells extend all the way to the end of the intercalated duct, which will have some cuboidal cells, or sometimes high squamous or low cuboidal. Then with the striated portion, you have columnar cells. You could also have a mixture of mucous and serous in some of the salivary glands. So you have the mucous appearing this way, and then the serous will appear deeper. So pale for mucous, dark for the serous production. And usually the serous portion forms a demilune, like a half a moon. So again, the serous portion is darker than the mucous portion. So this is just to connect you to what we've done in the past, and also introduce you to what we are about to do. So the outline for this episode will be esophagus, stomach, small intestine, from duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, then large intestine. We look at all that, then the appendix. So we are looking at the esophagus now, which is going to have three regions from superior to inferior. You have the you have upper one third, a middle one third, and then the lower one third. So you have the stratified squamous non-keratinized type of epithelium in the esophagus. The mucosa contains mucous glands in the upper and lower portion. So remember I said the esophagus can be divided into three major parts: the upper one third, the middle one third, and then lower one third. So we are saying that the mucosa contains mucous glands, which are usually located at the upper and then the lower portion. So it will be upper one third and then the lower one third. So these are mucous glands which will secrete mucus. So remember that you have mucous glands in the mucosa of the esophagus. So the mucosa glands in the lower portion usually are akin to that of the stomach mucosa glands around the cardiac region of the stomach. And as a result, those mucosa glands in the esophagus are sometimes called the cardiac glands also. The muscularis mucosa is thicker than in other parts of the gut. So that's another striking significance of the esophagus. Then you have the submucosa, which contains mucous glands. So in this case, we are looking at mucous glands in submucosa and mucous gland in the mucosa. And this will be the esophageal gland proper. That's how we sometimes call it. The glands can be classified as branched tubular. And the muscularis externa is made up of the inner circular and then the outer longitudinal. So under a low power, this is how the esophagus is going to look like with this micrograph. So the esophageal wall is composed or comprised of four main layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis propria or externa, and then adventitia. So that is the section for the epithelium. Then that is the lamina propria, and then that is the muscularis mucosa, the three forming the mucosa. All right. You see the very basophilic nature here of the esophagus lining. That is the submucosa. And then you also have muscularis propria. And the basophilic nature is indicative of the presence of glands that are picking most of the stain. There are times you also find this basophilic nature in other parts of the GIT because of the presence of rough endoplasmic reticulum together with the presence of glands as well. So this is what you see here. The stratified squamous nature is very, very clear in this stain. Then you have the mucosa, you have the submucosa, and then the muscularis externa with the inner circular and outer longitudinal muscle. Then you have the adventitia. Also note that the direction or orientation of the inner circular and outer longitudinal are different because the fibers are running in different directions. Those in the inner circular are running circularly, and those in the outer longitudinal are also running longitudinally. So when you cut them vertically, as this is done, you are not going to see them running at the same angle or direction. So again, you find this. So from this portion up to that portion is the mucosa. and that is the epithelium, EPI for epithelium. The L is for lumen, LP is lamina propria, MM is muscularis mucosa, all forming the mucosa. Then within this region, you find the dense irregular connective tissue, DICT, within the submucosa. Then from this portion, inner circular and then outer longitudinal will form the muscularis externa or propria. Then you have the adventitia. Again, look at the direction of the fibers. They are not the same. Okay, one is running parallel and continuous. The other is looking like fascicles because they are of different orientation. Then with this one too, we appreciate the epithelium, which is stratified squamous. Then we also appreciate the submucosa here. Okay, so muscularis mucosa is demarcating the end of the mucosa span. Then that is the submucosa, and you can see the glands showing there, the muscularis externa. Here too, you have the lumen, non-conified stratified squamous epithelium. Non-conified still stands for non-keratinized. Okay. Then you have lamina propria, muscularis mucosa. You have submucosa oesophageal glands. That is muscularis externa, inner circular, outer longitudinal. You have myenteric plexus of Albach, which will help in peristalsis. You have adventitia. So this is a cross section of the esophagus. So you are seeing the lumen in a certain circumferential manner or a complete form, unlike this one, which is vertical or longitudinal section. So you are not seeing a circular lumen. This micrograph has been truncated at this point and that point. If it was extended, you would have seen a complete lumen. So sometimes if you want to know whether a section is longitudinal or cross, you especially if the structure is a tube, you have to consider the lumen. If you can see the entire lumen, then that is a cross section or a transverse section. Okay, if you don't see the entire lumen, the lumen is like an open space and the whole structure is continuous or running along, then that becomes a longitudinal section. Okay, so we are not seeing a complete lumen here, so this is a longitudinal section. Okay, and sometimes I call it vertical section when the tube that has been sectioned is actually very short, it's not too long, then it looks more like it has been cut from up to down, which is also known as vertical. Okay, but once it's a tube, it's more appropriate to say a longitudinal section. So at this point, you are entering into the stomach, and so we look at a gastroesophageal junction. So when you look at the lining epithelium, you can tell that there's a difference. Okay, on the left side, there's stratification, stratified squamous, non-keratinized. When you look at this right portion, you see that there is some undulation going on. So that is simple columnar epithelium which has started appearing. Okay, those are muscles. So esophagus and then stomach. So we use this opportunity to enter the stomach, made up of mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa. The mucosa has the epithelium, which is simple columnar epithelium. It forms mucous surface cells, which produce mucus to protect the stomach lining. Then you have the cardiac portion, the fundic portion, and then the pyloric portion of the stomach. Okay, so here you can see that the color here is relating to the fundic region. Then that is the body. The green one is the cardia or cardiac region. Then you have the pyloric antrum, and then the pyloric canal, and then the sphincter, then into the duodenum. Okay, stomach is thrown into some mucosal folds called mammillated bodies. Okay, so you find some mucosal folds in there, as we will see. Then you also have rugae or rugae, which is also a folding. Okay, but this time around it is mucosa with submucosal core. So it means that the submucosa adds onto the mucosa and then throws it into fold, what we call the rugae. Okay, these are gastric folds, as you can see inside there. The stomach is peculiar in having an additional muscle known as the inner oblique, okay, which is the innermost portion. So if you want to travel from within outwards, we are going to have inner oblique, inner circular, and then outer longitudinal, as you see here. So from within outward, this is the oblique layer of the muscular coat, followed by the circular layer, and then the longitudinal layer. So when we look at the mammillated body, where you have the mucosa, okay, together, and when we say the mucosa, we know that it also includes the epithelium. Okay, so the epithelium comes down and then rises up, okay, and within that you have the mucosa also incorporated. So you have this epithelium going down and then coming up and then going down and coming up. This goes on all the way, okay, in the entire stomach lining. So within this core, you find a mucosa, okay. So the mucosa goes with the epithelium, comes down, and then goes again. So it means that here you have a space or a lumen, okay. This space or lumen will not have mucosa. It's a space. We call that the pit. And below the pit, the cells will be specialized to form a gland. Okay, so we have a glandular epithelium. And in this structure, we can locate the lining epithelium, which is what? Simple columnar. As you can see, it is taller than wide. So simple columnar cells. At this region, which is very close to the lumen or the surface of the stomach, we call that the pit. Okay, so we have surface mucous cells, which secrete mucus to lubricate the lining, okay, against the acidity, right? So that's the basal lamina of the lining epithelium. Then at this region, we classify that as the neck region. So the neck is lined by mucous cell as well. We call that the mucous neck cells, okay, which contains parietal cells. Parietal cells are also called oxyntic cells, and they secrete HCl. Okay, it looks triangular in shape with the pointed or the apex, directed towards the lumen, and then the base of the pyramid is close to the basal lamina or the basement membrane. It's very, very characteristic because it looks eosinophilic. Okay, as you can see, very pinkish. Those are parietal cells. And when we look at the glandular portion, you have several glands, 2 to 3, open into one pit. You have parietal cells also there, and then you have chief cells. So the chief cells occupy the deeper portion of the pit or the gland. Okay, so just like the chiefs in our communities, they have their own palace, and usually it is quite secluded from the rest of the town folks. Okay, the buildings of the town folks. So chief, that's why it is deeper. The chief cells, they are deeper. All right. And you also have enteroendocrine cells, which will form part of the APUD system. So this is the glandular portion. The chief cells produce pepsinogen, and then in the presence of the HCl, it will be converted to pepsin. Okay. And it's very basophilic. So you can see the purple nature of it. Okay, so you remember I was telling you that the dark portions you see below the epithelium, we were looking at the esophagus at that time. We saw some dark staining portion. I told you that it is because of the presence of glands. Okay, so you have a similar thing here. And then I also mentioned that there are times the presence of rough endoplasmic reticulum together with the glands will also make the place look very basophilic. It is always nice to look at drawings, and as I tell my students all the time, for histology, we deal with micrographs. The drawings makes things simpler, and we try to understand it from the point of the drawing, and then we juxtapose to the micrograph. So let's look at this and see whether we appreciate this even better. So that is taken from a portion of the stomach. That is the mucosa made up of the surface epithelium. So you can see the simple columnar cells, okay, coming down in the pit, in the form of the pit, and then forming the glandular portion and then rising, okay. And that is the lamina propria. So you can see that the lamina propria also forms a solid core of the mucosa that is rising up. So you can see when the epithelium goes up, the lamina propria goes with it. So we say that that's a mucosal fold, okay? And it comes down. When it is coming down, it is a space or a pit devoid of what? Lamina propria. Then it goes up, and you have the lamina propria there. It's like a solid pillar holding it, holding the epithelium. Okay, so that is how this is formed, and we call this the mammulated bodies. Okay, then there are times you find as we go ahead that sometimes the submucosa will go with it, will throw some of this mucosa upwards, and that will form the rugae. So at this point, you have the gastric pit, as we said earlier on, covered by surface mucous cells. Then you also have the neck and then the gland. Okay, so the neck region also having some parietal cells, and then the glandular region also having some parietal cells and then chief cells, and then the enteroendocrine cells. So that is what you find here. And these are the chief cells. Those are the parietal cells. That is submucosa, the blood vessels showing. The muscularis externa, oblique layer, which is innermost, then circular layer, then longitudinal layer. So you can see again the pattern, okay? The pattern of the orientation of the muscles. And that's serosa there. So here too you have the mucosa made up of the muscularis mucosa, the lamina propria, and then the epithelium. So that is the surface mucous cells there. Then you have neck mucous cells. Then when you come down here, you end up having the chief cells and some parietal cells as well. Okay. So that is a gastric gland. And that is a submucosa, oblique smooth muscle, circular smooth muscle, longitudinal smooth muscle. So stomach body, low power, a section of the stomach body demonstrating the layers of the gastric wall. So again, that is the mucosa. Okay. Now you can see the submucosa at this point pushing the mucosa upwards. Okay. So that is going to form the rugae. And then it goes. So earlier on, we were just looking at this portion where the mucosa goes with the epithelium and throws it into folds and form the pit and the gland. Okay, good. You can always use this muscularis mucosa as a landmark to tell you the limit of the mucosa. Then anything deep to that is submucosa. So that when you say that submucosa is throwing, the mucosa into a fold, this is what we mean. All right. At this point, you didn't have any, submucosa throwing it into food. So most of the diagrams we have seen so far were taken from regions such as this. Okay, but now you can see if it is extended, you are going to find something like that. The muscularis external propria serosa. Okay, so this also without the submucosa showing much here, it will be down. So we just want to concentrate on the mucosa. So you have mucous neck cells, you have the parietal cells around the neck, and then also deep to the glands. And obviously, chief cells are deeper to the gland. Gastric foveolae are just depictions of the pits. So this is also showing you a longer section that can incorporate the submucosa, okay, throwing the mucosa into folds. So you can see that. So those are rugae. Then if you take the section at that point, you are not going to find rugae. You're only going to find the pits and the glands. Okay. So I want to believe that this is very comprehensive. This is the point where the stomach will end and then give way to the duodenum, the small intestine. So you have a sphincter there, thickened circular smooth muscle. Okay, so this is one portion of the barrier, and that is the other portion of the barrier. It's just like when you go to the north, there's just a small boundary between Ghana and Burkina Faso. You can put one foot at one side and then the other when you get to the border. So this is more like a border. So there's one foot there, there's another foot. Our quest in the next video will be to be able to explain and distinguish between this region and that region. Okay, so that will be more of the stomach portion, and this will be more of the intestinal or duodenal portion. How am I able to tell? We will look at that in our next video. Thank you very much.